Thank you, Senator Langford. Mr. Barron, as you mentioned in your testimony, after 2022, NARA is going to no longer accept executive branch records in paper form. Could you explain to this committee the magnitude of this policy change and the challenges it's going to pose to NARA and, quite frankly, the rest of the executive branch?
Senator, it's transformative. The fact that NARA will no longer take paper but only digital or electronic records means that over the course of this decade and beyond, there will be tremendous amounts of records, I've said billions, that are coming. And I'm afraid that because of personal information in those records, it's going to be very difficult to use current processes for the American people to get access to them. And so that's a very, very big challenge. But the 2022 mandate from the archivists and OMB also means that after this year, every executive branch agency is also going electronic. They're transitioning so that all of their records are being managed electronically, and that means that they need to categorize them in a certain way, and they need to dispose of them, and they need to search them for FOIA purposes. And all of that is very difficult if you have tremendous amounts of electronic records that are there. We already see that in capstone repositories, which I support wholeheartedly because it's an archive of emails that otherwise would never have been printed out and saved in government files. But so we have to orient ourselves, we have to reimagine federal record keeping to deal with these volumes that are coming.
Well, and you talked about in some of your previous testimony about technological advancements and resources. Could you tell us more exactly what we're going to need to do and what sort of resources may be necessary to be able to get a handle around these documents?
Senator, as I stated in my written testimony, I've been a lawyer involved in e-discovery, electronic discovery, for the last couple of decades. And the legal community knows what state-of-the-art machine learning can do for finding responsive documents and filtering them for privilege. And so there seems to be a gap. There's the private sector that has some experience now with really state-of-the-art artificial intelligence, and not so much in government. There are some agencies that know about these tools from a litigator's perspective, but no one in the FOIA community and no one in the records management community are using machine learning for records management purposes, or if they do, they're very small numbers throughout the government. And so we really need to have a conversation and have experts lead that conversation so that record keeping can deal with these large volumes of records. And there are ways, there are tools that I know well about and lawyers know about in the community I've practiced in that can really be helpful to the government. So why not use them?
Mr. Barron, NARA has sometimes been unable to keep up with the pace necessary to digitize records in a timely way, and certainly the pandemic has exacerbated this problem. The agency has struggled to reopen research rooms all across the country and has amassed considerable backlogs of requests as a result of that. One particularly glaring example that I've noticed is the backlog of requests for veterans records from the National Personnel Records Center. My question to you, sir, is from your perspective, what is the primary reason behind these extensive backlogs and delays?
Well, I can tell you that I'm not at NARA anymore, and so I can't speak for them. But my understanding is that this is, as you say, a very big challenge, especially with veterans records, because of what NARA has done, which is to follow CDC guidelines on COVID. They've essentially not been able to get to the backlog, and that's unfortunate. I do have good news about researchers and research rooms that I heard archivist David Ferriero say just last week that NARA is essentially giving limited appointments to researchers to come in to do their research. And hopefully that will expand to both on a larger scale for research rooms to be open and for citizens to be able to use NARA. We all want that. So I hear you. I understand that it's a large problem, but I think NARA is working on it.
Ms. Wiseman, current law does not set any requirements for the transfer of presidential records to NARA at the end of the administration beyond making NARA responsible for the records at the end of the president's term. So my question for you, does this lack of a requirement around the transfer of presidential records to NARA create some real problems for both preservation and access?
Absolutely, and I think recent events really highlight this. From public reporting, I can identify at least two problems that occurred at the end of the Trump presidency. First, according to public reports, because the president refused to accept the results of the election, he delayed implementing the transfer of his records to NARA. And this is not a job that can be kept to the last minute. And I think, in fact, what this committee should consider legislatively is mandating that at the beginning of an administration, the White House work with the archivist to develop an accession plan with specific timeframes and goalposts in place, and that the archivist be charged with monitoring that the White House's compliance with such a plan, and that it advise Congress when there are problems. The second very well-documented or well-reported on problem at the end of the Trump presidency was the fact that the president took with him, we now know, at least 15 boxes of presidential records, some classified at the highest levels. Now, because of the volume of presidential material that an individual president leaves behind, it's my understanding that quite commonly a lot of presidential records remain at the White House, even though the president has left, but they're still considered to be under the legal custody and control of the archivists. I think, again, through legislation, Congress could make it clear that no record that is under the legal custody and control of the archivists can leave the White House unless it has the express approval of the archivists. So those are two problems that we've just recently experienced and two proposed fixes that I offer.
Thank you, Ms. Wiseman. Well, I'd like to thank Ranking Member Portman for holding this hearing with me here today, and I'd certainly like to thank each of our witnesses for joining us today in this important discussion and for providing your expert insights as to how we improve federal records management. The preservation of presidential and federal records is critical to preserving transparency, ensuring the federal government is working efficiently and effectively for the American people, and protecting our nation's historical record as well. I think as we heard from today's panel, the laws and the systems we count on to preserve these important documents are incredibly outdated, and Congress needs to take action not only to strengthen the records preservation process, but to also ensure that Americans get timely and appropriate access to these important resources. As I mentioned in my opening comments, I'm continuing to work on legislation that will modernize our record-keeping practices, strengthen enforcement of our records laws, and bring the law up to date with the emerging technologies that we see on the horizon. While NARA and the entire federal government have faced some serious challenges due to the lack of resources and accessibility, I certainly remain confident that we can address these challenges and increase transparency for every American. And again, thank you to our witnesses for helping us walk down that very important road to accomplish these ends. And with that, the record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on March 30th of 2022 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing